Here are a few things we can say Americans side against ICE. Well, maybe both times I've tested when you just ask ICE or the protesters. ICE has won. And admittedly, those were before the shooting, and it was narrow, but ICE has won. But I found this article, 5 takeaways from new polls of the Minneapolis ICE shooting. And before I say, I go into these are mainstream media polls. It's like Quinnipiac and YouGov, and some of them, SRSS, some of them are panels. And each one of these, every single one of these pollsters was to the left of me in the 2024 cycle, some of them egregiously so. But when I say egregiously in a national popular vote, I mean 5 or 6 points. So most of these polls have a 3-point margin of error at a national level. But when you poll multiple times, you're taking multiple samples and a picture emerges. You have a lot better idea where the underlying population mean is. It's not just like one random poll, like in an isolation. And yeah, numbers swing back and forth, but you get a good idea of where the number's really at. And so for somebody to be 5 or 6 points, it's multiple times outside of like a band of confidence that you develop when you're doing this. And so that's egregious. But at the same time, when you're polling public sentiment, it's like, does it really matter if 70% versus 75% support something? Like maybe not that much. I mean, it matters, and so I think if I polled these questions, I would probably come out roughly close with a caveat. And that one of the things that you see in these panels is that they accrue people who are anti-Trump and leftist because Trump evokes the most sentiment out of people. And even though they might answer a certain way at a national top line race, like for instance, in the Reuters Ipsos panel, you would see things like Kamala Harris up 4 points, but then she would have a 23-point net favorability advantage on Donald Trump. So they would have all these people who are going to vote Trump, but who are like rhino Republicans and were holding their nose. And they certainly didn't show crossover Democrats. If you think about it, like when you have Reuters Ipsos panel, that's probably like 50,000 people. The number of people, like if the electorate increases, they have to add people to their panel to reflect that. And if people change their mind, like if 1% of America changes their mind, that's only like, what is that? 500 respondents in their polling, in their entire panel. And so maybe those people didn't change their mind. Like kind of breaks down because you're not really sampling from a population. And so there's the chance that there's like baked in bias that's even bigger than, on these very fraught topics, these very Trumpy topics, beyond the type of bias that they might have had. And I would love to pull some of these things and try and test them. There are other tactics that they have here, like maybe there were lead-in questions, and we don't know if we're seeing them in the full order. But after an immigration and customs enforcement agent shot and killed Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis 1 week ago, reactions on social media and among politicians and political influencers rapidly polarized. But how do the rest of Americans, i.e. those who didn't so quickly weigh in, feel? We've now got a better sense thanks to 3 high-quality polls released in the last 24 hours. Quinnipiac, folks. Quinnipiac. Including a new poll from CNN. Here are a few things we can say Americans side against ICE. Well, maybe both times I've tested, when you just ask ICE or the protesters, ICE has won. And admittedly, those were before the shooting, and it was narrow, but ICE has won. You could have been forgiving for thinking the ICE shooting would be a 50-50 issue or close to it, but it's not. CNN poll shows 56% of U.S. adults, not likely voters, said the ICE agents' use of force was inappropriate compared to just 26 who said it was appropriate. Who's going to say that somebody who's got shot, deadly use of force was appropriate? Because, they ask them the question, like the person got killed. That's a high bar, like the way it's framed. I'm just saying. kind of explains why you have like a 26. There's like a pretty high not sure number, including a lot of people who saw the video. And that's partly, I think, because of the way the question's framed. Quinnipiac and YouGov also has another small panel. I'm pretty sure SRSS, CNN, and YouGov both do. Polls released Tuesday tested whether people thought the shooting was justified. The former showed, you know what I mean? Like, is justified the right word or not? The former showed registered voters, not adults, that's good, said that it was not justified, 53 to 35. So these people are smarter, it's tighter than the adults polling. While the latter showed Americans said it wasn't justified, 52 to 27. Relatively close in between the two of them. But so 3 polls, all with margins of between 18 and 30 points against ICE. That's a pretty decisive verdict in public opinion. Well, again, I would say at a national level, Trump's numbers didn't move. And so I think we're looking at a situation where it's like after Charlie Kirk, after Irina Zarutska, like this isn't going to cause, I think, a public upcry. I just really don't. I think a lot of people were watching it because they were intrigued in this sort of like gamesmanship of whether whose fault it was. But I don't think it's going to stop people's desire for mass deportations because remember, this is societal, this is cultural, this is economic. That's why these people, they want them to be gone. And they say it was like 2 to 1 among independents. I don't know. I find that highly suspect. I don't think I would see the same thing, but all I can tell you is like, trust me, bro. Just 1/4 echo the administration's domestic terrorism claim. But it's worth emphasizing that the Trump administration didn't just say the ICE agent Jonathan Ross was justified in shooting Good. It went quite a bit further, immediately casting Good's actions as domestic terrorism and saying she intentionally targeted the ICE agent with her car. Well, Americans are very concerned about domestic terrorism. And I haven't asked if they think these protests are domestic terrorists, but by a plurality, again, with like the George Floyd riots, people said that it was criminals just taking advantage of, the situation, and it wasn't mostly peaceful protesters. So I think we'd get a pretty decent number. It's looking pretty clear that this is out of step with the public's interpretation of events. Yahoo YouGov poll shows just 24% of Americans said Good was committing domestic terrorism. Well, the domestic terrorists are the people that are funding these things and hiring folks and giving them bricks and giving them tactics and telling them to go after ICE agents. Now, is blocking a road with your car domestic terrorism? I don't know, but it's like a vehicle is a deadly weapon and you're kind of using it. Like justification versus deadly terror. Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe she got paid. In which case, would that make her a domestic terrorist? We should investigate. Some in the administration have occasionally seemed to walk back Noem's claim. Well, that happens. The story has really penetrated. In cases there was any doubt how big this news was, the poll shows Americans are overwhelmingly paying close attention. The Yahoo poll showed 63% said they had heard a lot about the situation, and Quinnipiac poll showed 82% of voters said they'd seen a video of the shooting. Yeah, and like, I don't know, because people are paying a lot less attention to things like Venezuela in my polling, and I would have thought that that would have been pretty important as well. There is an aspect of these companies that use their own proprietary online panels are using people that are very like tech native, and that could over-index the amount of people that follow news like this, because I think there was an aspect of people just really watching this on social media. For instance, even after the U.S. ousted a foreign leader, Venezuela, earlier this month, just 42% in Reuters Ipsos poll said they'd heard a lot about it. And we're talking about in the same poll, no, that's Yahoo, but 63% and 82%, pretty big numbers of people who heard a lot about it or saw a video. Again, it feels like they're getting tech native people. Signs of a growing problem for the administration. And this is it. Like, they're crafting a narrative, and I disagree with this. Those other polls are interesting. Like, I can't refute them. I think I would find numbers relatively similar. I would probably be more comfortable in my results because I knew how I worded them and how I put them in order, and I was releasing everything, and I'm actually polling America. I'm not using this tiny little proprietary panel. But here's where it goes off the rails. Signs of a growing problem for the administration. No, it's not. Indeed, the danger in this episode for the administration is not just that Americans disagree with this posture on the ICE agent. As I wrote last week, the political risk is that this becomes a flashpoint in the debate over ICE and President Donald Trump's deportation campaign. I'm not hearing anybody talk about Renee Good anymore. They're just not. Look, Tim Walz wasn't even really talking about her at all. He just wasn't. ICE and Trump's deportations have polled poorly for a while now. Trump's still winning on the issue of immigration, though. But we haven't seen a huge backlash in Congress or the streets. You're not going to. This is what America voted for. We had over 60% supporting Trump's program of mass deportation. I'm sorry. This is what you ask for, America. In recent days, we started to see some key influencers like Rogan more vocally criticizing the ICE raid. Like that could have some effect. But Rogan, who supported Trump in 2024, likened the ICE actions to the Gestapo. Well, the FBI under Joe Biden was the Gestapo too. And I don't know, does Rogan have the same influence anymore? It seems like just in the last 3 or 4 years, the number of people who have branched out and look at other influencers and influence hop has probably increased. I haven't really heard much about Joe Rogan recently, actually. New poll shows ICE's overall numbers haven't changed that much. Right, exactly. People dislike the way the agency is enforcing immigration laws before the Minneapolis shooting, and they still dislike it today, 57 to 39. Well, we had, a decent amount of people who said that ICE was being too harsh, but we had a majority of Republicans said that they weren't being harsh enough, and they were about right. Ultimately, they're the ones that voted for Donald Trump. And, I don't think the independent numbers were that bad either. We can pull that up later if you want to look. Yeah. There's a follow-up, blah, blah, blah. Noem's approval is slipping amid nascent impeachment push. In my numbers, the cabinet heads, it's really tough to tell because every time that something's happened, I've polled these questions and the numbers really haven't moved. I don't think people listen. If they find a signal, again, I think it's because they're getting a bunch of basically news junkies. And that's the kind of person that signs up for a panel. It's like, hey, you're officially a member of the Reuters Ipsos panel. You're a member of the YouGov panel. And we're going to contact you multiple times a day in order to take these polls. And it's all about the news. I think that's part of really what's going on here. I don't really want to get, I pulled the crosstabs up. I don't know. Let's move on. I'm feeling like I want to get to the other topic. This is the SRSS one. You can check these out. These are basically not really crosstabs. They're top lines. It tells you some of the questions they asked. Was this shooting an appropriate use of force? There's a methodology statement. It's talking about they're using their own panel. It's 44% independent ID, and it's only 28% Democrat. And then they're still getting these big numbers. So part of the problem is what's the makeup of these independents? And does the makeup of those independents match how independents voted in November of 2024? I bet you the answer is no. I'm just going to guess the answer is no. Because one of the big differences between me and all these other outfits is that I routinely in the fall was showing that Trump was either tied or winning with independents, and they always showed Trump down quite a bit with independents. So anyways, just a refresher. This is not only about mass deportations, but actually about fraud. And I've talked about this poll a lot, but this is the guiding principle here. How would you describe your current feelings about the amount of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government? And it's 75%, which is the highest number we've ever seen. Republicans, 78%, independents, 77%, 46% of independents are very, very unhappy. And so they can try and make this about ICE people throwing, your abuela in a black van. But this is also, remember, Trump surged these ICE agents after they uncovered all of this Somali fraud. That's what this is about. This is about Doge 2.0 and Trump's second chance at waging war against $600 billion in alleged government fraud. Imagine what our deficit would look like if we got rid of just half of that. How closely have you followed reports about fraud in Minnesota? 61%, at least somewhat closely, 30% very closely. It's weird that there's the age signals older voters. It's kind of weird that the younger voters haven't been following this because they usually follow most topics more closely. And there's not enough people, there's not enough Republicans that know this. Only 42% very closely, 70%. I think there's a huge opportunity here to highlight how bad all of the blue states are. What's the independent numbers? 62% of independent numbers, only 30% very closely. They need to get more information out about this huge upside opportunity. How likely is it that the amount of fraud in Minnesota involving federally funded programs is more than $1 billion? And that's a bad question. 18% not sure, but it is 53 to 28, so a pretty strong majority. But here's the big one. Agree or disagree with this statement? The fraud reported in Minnesota so far is just the tip of a very large iceberg of fraud involving federally funded programs nationwide. 61%. America's like, yes, obviously there's fraud everywhere, and we want to go after it. 61% to only 26%. So, what's a more relevant question here? Whether it was justified for Renee Good to be shot, or whether America wants the government to go on a nationwide anti-fraud, anti-corruption crusade because of their anger at the level of waste, fraud, and abuse. This is the signal that got Trump elected. This is the burn it down, no trust in the institution, pro accountability signal that I've been hammering on for weeks. We aren't seeing this stuff. It's not enough. We should be uncovering every day. They should have forensic accounts up there from the IRS, like just pouring over all of these people that, didn't claim all of this stuff on their taxes.